Hotep, Brother Beniti, I'm Ray. Um, what I want to talk about briefly is I want to dispel the myth, some misinformation on uh, when practicing spiritual magic or magic in general. The ritual of banishing. Big misconception on this. The term banishing, when you hear that term, to banish something would mean to get rid of it, to remove it. So some people have interpreted in various different magical systems, and it doesn't matter if it's witchcraft, if it's black magic, um, any system that one practices. There's always some form of ritual banishing, clearing the sacred space before invoking the presence of deity. So some have termed that as removing one's spiritual energy or trying to banish and remove energy of deities. That's incorrect and completely incorrect. And those who interpret it such as that are incorrect. Now, you'll find, again, in the various different practices and magical systems, um, there are different methods of doing the banishing ritual. Um, you have one that's very synonymous and familiar with most of the magical systems, which is the invoking the pentagram or the banishing ritual of the pentagram, I should say. Now, in doing this, a lot of these systems, for an example, in the banishing ritual of the pentagram, some use the Kabbalah method, which I'm not a huge fan of because it still ties into religious um, philosophies. They'll invoke the four archangels, the angel Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, and and Oriel. And this turn to me, this focuses you more back into religion. In the part of the ritual, you invoke those deities to descend down upon your sacred space, to clear your sacred space. Um, Now, I'm not really a huge fan of that because I still think that has a lot of religious overtones to it. Now, there's many different methods one can use. Um, I personally use a method where I invoke archetype energies of Egyptian deities and archetype energies that they represent. So, if one wanted to activate the elements of earth, wind, air, fire, I would activate the Egyptian deities that are affiliated with those archetype energies rather than calling upon more symbolic or fictitious religious characters, such as the four angels, which really most of them represent similar aspects of these nature forces. But again, that ties you back in biblical. Now, again, there's no right or wrong way. It's what your subconscious mind is putting behind the meaning of what you're invoking. So here's the clarification that I want to make clear because people think that you are banishing deities when you are invoking deities to clear your sacred space. You can either use a specific magical tool such as a dagger, a sword, but you also are creating your circle and you're closing that circle and the space within that circle you're making sacred to do your magical work. So you are invoking energy. For an example, also, if we use the example of the ritual that the Order Templi Orientis uses, or OTO, they invoke deities, specifically the deity Pan, when they are in doing their banishing ritual. Same thing when you look at their ruby red star ritual, which is a ritual. Same thing. They're invoking deity to clear the sacred space. So you are not you are not destroying or trying to remove deity from your sacred space. You are invoking certain energies that are responsible to come down, for lack of a better word, to bless, sanctify, and purify your sacred space. So people have that twisted. I never really understood, and the reason why I figure I do a quick video on this because I get a lot of emails on this, and sometimes it's easier just to make a video on it as opposed to answering a multitude of level of emails. So again, the magical working of banishing, and there is again no specific one way to do it, because remember, being a practitioner of spiritual magic, first and foremost, creating your own spiritual path is key more than anything. And don't let anybody tell you otherwise. And anybody that tells you otherwise for creating something that's unique to yourself is a fool, because they're a follower. And so we can't get caught up in these practices of strictly following certain methods, because then again we're back to established religion, and that's not what spiritual magic and creating your own path is truly about. So people always have a lot of questions about what's right, what's wrong. That's irrelevant. What's right or wrong is going to vary from person to person. So if we start looking at, for an example, the banishing ritual as a ritual in the sense that we are banishing negative energy. That's another thing I want to clarify. Again, a true magician doesn't look at working with spiritual energy as good or bad. They just look at varying degrees of vibration. Because then again, we're back to a religious mindset. If we are separating what we're terming good and bad, if we separate that, we're subconsciously making a statement that they're two different things when they're one and the same. What you call good and bad, or varying degrees of energy, is actually the same thing. Now, one, based on their vibration and frequency, can perceive an energy as good or bad to them. And that's where I think it gets a little confusing for some. So, for an example, one individual might perceive something to them that appears negative or feels negative to them based on their vibration and frequency, whereas to myself or another, that frequency and vibration may not be negative. So again, in relation to the banishing ritual, let's establish that fact. There's no such thing as good or bad energy. It's just varying degrees of vibration and how one is perceiving that energy. So when one is working with magic and archetype energies, whether it's the banishing ritual, clearing their sacred space, or invoking the energy of deity, one must fully be conscious of the vibrational energy or the type of energy that they're invoking or working with in order to understand it. And remember, it's always the intent that the subconscious mind creates that drives the magical working. That's key. So whatever you put in your subconscious mind that you have accepted that you're working with, that's what that energy becomes, because the deity that is stamping that magical working as a reality is you, whether you're aware of it or not. Now, what we're terming as something external, as energies, people, you can call them deities, you can call them gods, you can call them demons, you can call them whatever you want. Even though we're creating the illusion that this is something external, we are accessing various planes and degrees of spiritual energy. Now, because we tap into it and because we sense it by raising our vibrational frequency up, that sometimes can be perceived as something external that's outside of ourselves. Remember, all things are connected. First Hermetic principle, all is mental, mental is all. So one has to understand how everything is interconnected and how it works within. That's the bottom line. So to clarify that myth, again, on what banishing is, I want to clarify that, because that's kind of become a religious thing in a sense when dealing with the occult and metaphysics and spiritual magic. Some people have taken some of these techniques and turned them religious. So I never understood that, this good and bad thing and removing negative energy. If you're working with the vibrational energy that's connected to you, because you're drawing that spiritual presence outside of yourself. Now, whether you've termed that on a multitude of levels of how you perceive it. That's going to vary from individual to individual, and some people are trying to understand it as far as what they're working with or how it works. One first and foremost has to understand self. Now again, the problem is you got all these people out here again, as I've said many times, over intellectualizing shit, but not doing any type of work. They say they're doing work, but all they're basically doing is a lot of philosophical debate, a lot of historical debate, which is fine if that's your thing. But at the end of the day, how is that productive? How are you taking that information, applying it, and putting it into practice? And there's a trap in that, because we get caught up in the illusion of getting sucked into a lot of these intellectual debates. Now, as I've said before, I could go back and forth with it all day. But it gets to a point in your spiritual journey where you actually got to be a practitioner and start putting into practice what you claim you're reading. Because I could sit here all day and read 10,000 books, but if I'm not taking any of that information and putting it into practice to not just change myself but change the environment around me, and believe me, you don't fully understand or understand that until you're actually a practitioner of magic, experience it for yourself and see the actual results, not just read about it. And you can't convey that to anybody or teach that to anybody. That's an experience that somebody has to grasp themselves and go through, because when working with science and magic, which basically that's what magic is, manipulation of the subconscious mind, it's a mixture of all those things. It's not really something you can just confirm by word of mouth, because it's an experience that one has to get up under their belt to really see how it works. Because anybody that does practice can sit here and talk to you about it all day, but then again, we're just giving you our own personal experience, and if you accept that personal experience without confirming it as reality, then that's, we're back to faith and belief again. And this is a system that we practice. Everybody talks about the ancestors, everybody talks about ancient Egypt and Africa, but I don't see anybody applying the methodology that was always used. We get caught up in the historical past of those cultures and trying to practice the external aspects of those cultures, how they were practiced back then, and not updating it into 2016. And that's where we get a problem, because now we're stuck in the past. And that's no different than religious people that still go to church and are still trying to keep alive practices that applied back then, and trying to do that in 2016 and really have no, valid proof that any of it was a reality. That's a whole nother story when dealing with religion. So hope that sheds some clarity, because I've got a lot of emails on what is banishing and clearing your sacred space. That's exactly what it is. You're invoking certain archetype energies. You're not banishing in the sense that you're removing deity or energy from your sacred space. You are calling upon certain archetype energies that banishes, cleanses, blesses, sanctifies, whatever term you need to use to grasp it, to purify that sacred space before one invokes certain deities or ancestral spirits to do magical workings, etc. So don't look at it in that light. If you're new to this, or if you've been practicing it, want to remove the religious ideology from the mindset and clarify those myths, one should not go into those rituals of banishing and look at it in that light, because that's completely incorrect. So again, hope to shed some light on the ritual of banishing, and we'll see you on the next post. We'll be putting several part series post up from the lecture and class we'll be doing this weekend, this Saturday. So look for some new videos this weekend in multiple parts. It's your brother Beniti saying Hotep, and we'll see you on the next post. Peace.